Hello and welcome. I'm Brenda Mahoney, joined by Kirsi Allison-Ampe, here as part of Build Arlington's Future to talk about Build Arlington's Future is a proponent group made up of elected officials and volunteers in favor of the 3 ballot questions for Proposition 2.5 override debt exclusion vote on June 14th. And Kirsi also sits on the board, the school committee. Yes. So we're here to specifically talk about question number 2, which is approving for a debt exclusion beyond Proposition 2.5 for bonds for a feasibility study for the high school. Yes. So this is essentially asking for a study to see what can be done about the high school that's been identified. Go ahead and tell me how it's been identified and put on warning status that there is a need for a high school here, a new high school here in Arlington.
Great, thanks for having me. So a feasibility study is part of the MSBA's process. The MSBA is the Massachusetts School Building Association or Authority, and they are the ones who fund the building of schools and handle the state money which is provided. A feasibility study is done to look at, is one of the first parts of the building process. After you've been accepted into the program, you go through some eligibility steps and then you move on, and the parts of the feasibility study are to evaluate the educational program of the high school, what you're doing now, what you need to do in the future. You evaluate the building, what are its needs now in terms of reconstruction, what are its needs going to be in the future, and then you proceed from there to do some different you come up with 3 or 4 different alternatives. You look at a complete rebuild, you look at a renovation, you look at things in between. Those are put out to a cost estimator who generates how much it would cost for these different alternatives and also what the benefits of each might be. And then a decision is made which of those alternatives is best for the town and which is felt to be best by MSBA. And then that one proceeds on to have schematic design done. The schematic design is a much deeper level of design, and that is then costed out, and then that becomes what we're talking about doing with MSBA in terms of the rebuild. And then that goes on for construction.
Right, so it hasn't been decided yet then as to which route to take. This is simply an open-ended feasibility study that addresses, let's take a look at Arlington High School and see what plan we can come up with, what different plans would cost and so forth. I also want to back up though just a little bit as to people who, because there's been so much else going on in town with school enrollment, the high school hasn't been spoken about or talked about as much because it hasn't gone through any real process yet. So tell me about the high school and why it's been identified both by Arlington and even by the New England Board of Schools and Colleges, I believe, as needing a new facility.
Yes. I think the board that you're talking about is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. It is an accreditation agency. Accreditation is a voluntary procedure which almost all schools go through to show that they're maintaining high standards, both in terms of the education that they're providing and also that their facilities are up to the standard which is needed. Arlington went through their accreditation process last in 2013. It's every 10 years. At that time, we did well, except for facilities. We were put on warning, which is not good, because of the shape our facilities were in. The NEASC was especially concerned about the way the substandard classrooms, because of size and because of visual obstruction, the poor science classrooms, which are small and ancient, and they put us on warning because of these things. If we have not addressed these by the time 2023 rolls around, we have a good chance that we would not pass the next set of accreditation.
So what's at stake here if voters do not approve Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion for this feasibility study?
Okay, first, I think that's unlikely to happen. I think talking to both parents, talking to senior citizens, many of whom went through the schools, I think there's a good sense that it's time. We need to rebuild the high school. But if by chance, for some reason, the question was to fail, I think what we would have to do is go back and do some focus groups, surveys, try and understand why it failed. My guess would be that there had been some confusion about Arlington's question and the Minuteman question, and we would want to tease that out and then address it, and then we would most likely go back again. If we were not able to pass a feasibility study ever, it would mean that we would not be able to rebuild the high school completely. We would have to go into a complete repair process, which would also be very, very expensive and would likely not have MSBA support.
And could possibly still put you at risk for the NEASC accreditation?
Yes, because we would not, as part of a repair process, we would not be able to reconfigure the classrooms. We wouldn't be able to address the needs which are seen in 21st century learning, which are different from, our high school buildings were built in 1914, in 1938, in 1960, in 1981. There's never been a top-down reconstruction or renovation. And things have changed even since '81. There's been big changes in how education happens and how our students are felt to learn best.
Tell me how, once people vote for this, that this is the beginning of a longer process, that MSBA was just invited Arlington to go to the eligibility period now for the high school, that this is part of a longer process, that this is just the beginning. If we approve this, if we buy into this, then you're going to buy into the rest of it, presumably.
Yes, we certainly hope so, because we feel strongly that it's time that the high school is rebuilt. So the process, as I said, MSBA, we follow MSBA's process because we would appreciate their tens of millions of dollars to help us pay for it. And it's a very scripted process. You have to go all through these steps. The steps include the eligibility period, which is what we're in now, the feasibility module, which starts soon, the schematic design module, which kind of overlaps the feasibility module, which is when we produce schematic designs, which will eventually be fleshed out into the new high school. And then there's other modules past that, which include picking an owner, project manager, and designer, picking doing the funding, which would be the debt exclusion to pay for the high school, and then the construction phase, which will, in our case, be a long process. Most likely, if we hit all our milestones with a reasonable pace, but not an accelerated pace, we would hope to be seeing the doors of a new high school open in 2021.
Is this the only part of the project, the feasibility study, that would be 100% paid for by town?
Even this, my understanding is that if we go through the whole process and are accepted to rebuild the high school entirely, this part is also partially reimbursable.
Up to what percent?
That depends. The reason I can't give you an exact number is because MSBA has guidelines on what it will and will not reimburse. For example, there are many town offices that are in the high school currently. If we keep those there, that part will not be reimbursable. And they also have a maximum cost per square foot to which they'll reimburse. If we have to pay more, because that's what the market is bearing, we won't be reimbursed for that extra part. We're hoping somewhere between 30 and in the 40s. And we saw with the Thompson, we maximized the amount of the reimbursable amount for the Thompson School, and we would expect to do that with the high school.
The high school is looking at being redone for facilities. However, the feasibility study will also look at academics and so forth. What about for space? With the enrollment issue actually being addressed in question number 1 for elementary and middle schoolers, and the McKibben report for the forecasts, is there actually going to be more space needed at the high school for these growing enrollments that are coming up?
There may well be. We anticipate, when you look at the McKibben report, If you look 5 years out, we're going to have an additional 230 students at the high school. If you look 10 years out, it's almost 400. And those kids have to have seats in classrooms. Where it gets a little confusing is, first, there are the town offices and things, so maybe we boot them out and that becomes space so the actual high school doesn't increase in size. And also there are constraints put on by the MSBA for some things that you can have. Like, you can't pay for 2 gyms. So if we want to have 2 gyms, either we're going to have to pay for one of them ourselves, or we're going to need to repurpose something. So most likely there will be more classroom space, but exactly how much is difficult to say at this point.
And then the MSBA has their own set of rules that they look at their own data and forecast for projections, as they did in Thompson, correct? And that, therefore, if we're relying on their numbers, is it possible? I know this is getting down the line, but this is a question that, you know, this is the beginning of a long process here. Could we have the same situation that happened with Thompson if the MSBA does not equal the same projected numbers that we have, and then therefore we aren't able to get that reimbursed amount for the additional space?
That's a really interesting question. Part of the problem is that we're having to predict quite far in the future, and it's very difficult to say exactly how many students. I think when you look back at I was talking to Jane Morgan today, and she was talking about how she had looked back at the Thompson numbers, and really the birth numbers did not show the kind of numbers that we're seeing in the school at this point. We will do, so yes, the MSBA comes in with their own set of numbers. We now have a new tool in our toolbox, which is the forecast model, not just a projection model. We're hoping that will help support our argument for a larger school as we go forward. How much, I'm not sure when, what year we plan to build for. Do we plan to build for a enrollment 5 years out or 10 years out? But we'll certainly be having these discussions and be pushing back at the MSBA as much as possible. And I think they're aware of the things with the Thompson. So I think that we do have some ability to talk to them and get them to understand that we really do, even their numbers may be different. We have good reason to be concerned.
Anything else that you want to add that people may not realize about the high school feasibility question number 2 for voters on June 14th?
I really hope that people will vote for it. It is, if you, as the campaign goes forward, I'm sure there's going to be opportunities to come in and have tours, and we've already done this for officials. It is actually amazing seeing the classrooms which have columns. I mean, there could be a column right in front of you and you can't see the teacher because your seat's behind the column.
And there were tours a few years ago, but that would be great if people open it back up for the next steps in the process, as there could be, as Mr. Dunn alluded to, that there could be coming back for another override in 18 months to 2 years for the actual project cost of the high school, correct?
Yes, that will be a necessary part of this, because this just funds the feasibility study, and then we'll have to actually pay for the high school.
On behalf of Kirsi Allison-Ampe and the Build Arlington's Future, addressing question number 2, specifically the high school feasibility study, I'm Brenda Mahoney. Thanks for joining us.